I recently gave a talk for the Secular Student Alliance's annual conference. This year was virtual for obvious reasons, and I don't normally post my talks online, but because this one was specifically geared toward high school and college students, and because I don't think I'm going to give this speech again anytime soon, I figured I would share it with all of you. Hello, Secular Student Alliance. I'm excited to talk to you all specifically because I've been in your shoes as a young activist who cares deeply about atheism and church-state separation and pushing back against Christian nationalism and everything else that entails. Just to give you some background, I started an SSA group in college. I was on the board of the National Secular Student Alliance. I was the chair of the board for a few years, and I'm not exaggerating when I tell you I would not be doing any of the work I'm doing today if not for the support I got from the SSA. So this is a cause that I've been fighting for nearly half my life now. I genuinely appreciate the fact that you would take time to be here and watch this, and I hope in the future we can do this sort of thing in person again soon. So the topic for this conference is envisioning a better world. And when I heard that, I thought there's an obvious way to do it. And the weird thing is that I don't think I've ever heard anyone make a case for it at any other atheist conference or event I've ever been to. So I'm going to do it here. In fact, I'm going to just give away the ending of this speech and tell you what I hope you take away from it. You might laugh, but I'm not joking. And I'm directing this specifically to the high school and college students who are watching. I want you to finish this video with a question in your head. Which office am I going to run for a year from now? I don't care if your answer is school board or city council or student body president or state legislature or even Congress. By the way, for all of those except Congress, you usually only have to be 18 years old to run. Congress is 25. And I don't care if you already have a career plan, because I'm not asking you to abandon it. Outside of Congress, this is not an either-or situation. You can do both. But I want you to identify an office and seriously look into the steps necessary to work towards it. Because getting in office is doable if you know what you're doing, and if you're passionate about the cause, and if you figure out how to address any weaknesses you might have. It's kind of like running an SSA group. And I would also point out that a lot of the people who end up running for office don't know how to do any of these things. Now, let me back up and talk about why that's a goal you should aim for. Something that frustrates me to no end is that when I think about the worst people in public office, and I'm going to do my best to keep this a nonpartisan speech because the SSA is a nonpartisan group, and I know we're all aware of Congress members who might annoy us because they get a lot of coverage, but when it comes to state-level candidates or city officials, the ones who have a more direct impact on your life and happen to be really bad at what they do, a lot of times they run unopposed. Do you know how many elected offices there are in the United States? You think Congress, that's 535 people right there. There are governors and state representatives. So what's the total across the country? Several thousand? Maybe 10,000? 20,000 maximum, right? Actually, by one estimate, the actual number is more than 519,000. More than 500,000 elected officials in the country. Almost all of them are local government officials, and a lot of those seats only have one person interested. We shouldn't have to settle for our elected officials. A lot of times, even if there is a challenger, the incumbent wins because there's no real effort in a campaign, and it feels like no one's even paying attention. Sometimes I wonder if the people running care about their races. So why do they do it, even though they're bad at it? Everyone has their own reasons, but One reason that shouldn't be ignored is that whatever you think about their politics, they feel obligated to run because it's part of a larger cause for them. For example, they may be Christian activists who believe the best way to honor God is by pushing for pro-Christian laws through the government. I remember for years before Trump was in office, there was a group called the American Renewal Project. And it would get huge headlines every couple of years because the guy running it was making this bold claim of what he wanted to accomplish. He wanted 1,000 pastors to run for elected office. At one point, he said he had over 500 who committed to running for something within a few years. I'm not sure how that panned out, but that is what he said. And why was this so important for David Lane, the guy who ran it? I'm going to paraphrase this, but he basically said, if you had 1,000 candidates who had about 300 volunteers apiece, that meant 300,000 Christians getting involved in politics, some of whom would later go on to run for office themselves. And that would lead to a kind of Christian nationalist revolution that he wanted to see. And how would he define success? I mean, if 10% of the people who ran won their races, we're talking 100 conservative Christian pastors in office. That's not nothing. That creates change. The question is, what kind? I disagree with just about everything that guy believes politically, and I'm happy to say his group kind of faded away in recent years, but in terms of getting his side excited and involved, that's pretty amazing. Why aren't we doing that when our ideas are so much better? I know atheists are not monolithic, but most atheists share values in a lot of important areas. More on that in a bit. So going back to those really bad public officials, in local government especially, why do you think they run unopposed so often or without a real challenger? Maybe because they live in a heavily conservative or heavily liberal district, and it seems all but impossible to unseat them. But I would also argue it's because a lot of the smartest, youngest, most media-savvy, thoughtful policy wonks out there also tend to have the most self-doubt. It feels like it's always the mediocre or bad people who are so confident they would be good at everything they do, including politics, while the smartest people I've ever met are the kinds of people who think they shouldn't run because they're not perfect candidates, or they don't know everything, or they don't come from a political family, or they don't have a lot of money, or they don't like the idea of asking for money or publicly criticizing someone else's positions. But that cycle keeps perpetuating itself. Without good people in government, we won't have a good government, which discourages good people from wanting to go into government. But how many of you marched in a protest over the past few years? Maybe it was after the murder of George Floyd. Maybe it was the Women's March in 2017, or the March for Science, or for any cause that matters to you. Clearly you care. But all that marching is only meaningful if it translates into action. I've seen this in recent weeks. When city councils say we're changing up how much money the police department gets and reinvesting it in our communities in other ways, that's a result of the protests. But that only happens when you have people in elected office who can vote on those decisions. So, if you care, then marching is nice. But running for office is better. A number of candidates who ran in 2018 said they decided to go for it because of the Women's March in 2017. I've personally been inspired by a number of people who have run for office in the past few years who seem to come out of nowhere, but they have this passion for public service and an understanding of media and the ability to cut through the BS and the ability to just speak honestly to voters. Now, I know I'm speaking to you, a lot of young atheists, and not, future politicians of America. I'm aware of that. And this is not a speech I would make to them. I'm making it to you for a reason. And one big reason is that I never heard anyone give this type of speech to me when I was in your shoes. Because being an open atheist, running for office would have been a non-starter. That's changing. I'll tell you how in a bit. But another big reason, I don't think anyone ever told me I should even consider running for office when I was in my teens or 20s. Even now in my late 30s, no one's seriously saying that. And that's stupid. If you take this stuff seriously, you should be thinking about it in high school and college. So I'm coming into this thinking, assuming, you probably care a lot about science, sex education, critical thinking, evidence-based policies, LGBTQ rights, women's rights, healthcare, student loans, and yes, atheism. If you want to say in how we deal with those issues, we've spent way too long as a movement complaining from the sidelines and watching the world burn. And I want you to take a direct role in changing that. Let's start with the last thing I mentioned, atheism. Because this is where I'm going to get a bit selfish. Because as much as I want people who agree with me on the issues to run for office, there's also some strategy behind it. This may sound like a tangent, but I promise I'll loop back around in a bit. Here's a pop quiz for you. Name the most famous atheists you can think of. Someone your non-atheist friends would also know. So, sorry, bloggers and YouTubers, you don't count. Do a couple of names come to mind already? And while you think about that, I'll ask you this. How important is it to have any atheists in office at all? Because the fact is, we don't actually need atheists in government. I don't need someone in Washington or a state capitol doing the work of atheist activists. And there are really good religious people in office who support church-state separation and all the other values I care about too. I'm happy to vote for them. I've done it in every election. But I would argue that symbolism matters. It matters when people see a Muslim congresswoman or a transgender state rep or a bisexual senator in ways that go so far beyond mere identity politics. You see them, and maybe you see a little bit of yourself in them. And maybe you think, I could do that. This thing that I thought would hold me back doesn't have to. How many of you have told someone you're an atheist only to have them say, oh, but I thought you were a good person? And that happens because for the longest time, the only atheists other people got exposed to were the ones who had a goal of trashing religion. I'm not saying that's even bad, only that that's a fact. For example, think about stand-up comedy. When you see a comedian on stage who is open about being an atheist, they're making jokes about religion. Bill Maher is not winning the hearts and minds of devout Christians, because that's not his goal. George Carlin wanted to point out religious hypocrisy, and that might be okay, but realize those are well-known atheists. Some of the first people who come to mind when other people think of atheists. Or maybe they think of famous atheist authors, like Richard Dawkins. But again, in his book, The God Delusion, his goal, he says, is to convince you you're wrong about religion. And again, that's fine. I appreciate that. But it's also easy for religious people to demonize him because of that. So are there any famous atheists who don't rub religious people the wrong way? Honestly, I'm steeped in this world, and it's hard for me to think of any. And maybe that's because I don't think there's a nice way to tell people, even subtly, that they've devoted their lives to a lie. But that's my point. How many atheists can you think of who are open about it and talk about it, but who are not in the business of promoting it? I don't think there are that many. Some actors and athletes might bring it up in interviews, but it's usually very brief and it's not that substantive. Even Daniel Radcliffe, who's talked about atheism more than most other actors, is still known for his acting, not his religious views. A few months ago, the Pew Research Center published the results of a survey they did, in which they asked people, who's the first person who comes to mind when you think of atheism? 51% couldn't name anybody. 26% named some random people, including Bill Maher, Stephen Hawking, Obama, who was not an atheist, and Jesus for some reason. 10% mentioned somebody they knew personally, but actual famous names, there was a top 3. You ready for this? Number 3, Madalyn Murray O'Hair, the founder of American Atheists, someone who helped take forced prayer out of public school, someone who's long been a boogeyman for the religious right, who was also subsequently murdered. There was a Netflix movie about her a couple of years ago. That name makes sense, but she's been dead for more than 25 years. Number 2 on the list, Richard Dawkins. I think that one is self-explanatory. The number 1 name on the list, Satan. No joke. So what's my point? I'm just saying we don't have a great image, and I wish we did. It would be so nice if there were famous atheists known outside of our bubble who also didn't make a lot of people cringe. But good luck finding that. And now we're full circle. This is where running for office can actually help us. This is where it's strategic. This is why getting elected means not just better government, but more visibility for atheism than any other job, even if an atheist happens to be the leader. Because in theory, when you are in government, you're fighting for everyone. That's your job. It's perhaps the highest profile place you could find an atheist who's open about being an atheist, but whose job is not advocating for atheism. It may be the best opportunity we have to show people respectable atheists in public life, in a place where their job is not to denigrate religion. And that goes such a long way to changing the perception that we can't be good people. I'm not saying that's the reason you should run for office, but if you care about the image of atheists and destigmatizing atheism, it's a damn good reason. Don't ignore it. I'm telling you this as someone who grew up thinking atheism was synonymous with bad. And even later when I became an atheist, I thought it was a deal breaker for political candidates. After all, there are more than half a dozen states whose constitutions still say you have to believe in a higher power in order to run for office. None of those laws are enforceable, but the fact that they exist at all tells you what people used to think about atheism, and in some cases still do. But I'm telling you, that's not true anymore, and it's really not true for younger people. Let's talk about that for a bit. The granddaddy of polling here, the one that gets cited everywhere, is a Gallup poll that asks people if they would consider voting for a blank person for president if that person belonged to your party. All other things considered, would you vote for a woman, a black person, a gay person? And every category has seen a rise over the years. Regardless of party, it seems like most people today don't really care about a candidate's gender or race. They don't care if you're Jewish or Hispanic. It's getting to the point where they don't really care if you're gay. And that's true even among Republicans. I mean, it's less true among Republicans, but it's changing. So they did this poll again in January, and the results were just shocking. Not only did a record 60% of Americans say they would be fine voting for an atheist, all other things considered, when they broke it down by age, 77% of people ages 18 to 34 said atheism would not be an issue for them. In 1958, that number was 18% support. In 2007, it was 45%. The growth there in such a relatively short time is amazing. We're at the point where we've gone from virtually unelectable to not even that special. And that's awesome. That means atheism is less of a deal breaker than we thought. And again, that question is only about voting for a president, which is an office where we tend to know the candidate's entire life stories. You think anyone cares about your religion when you're running for state rep? Hardly. You think they care about your theology if you're running for city council? Not a chance. No one even knows who's on the ballot for city council. True story. I try really hard to keep track of openly non-religious people in public office. And as of 2018, there are about 50 of them across the country in office at the state level or higher. No Republicans on that list. Well, a couple of months ago, I found out that there may, in fact, be an atheist Republican on a city council. So I called her up. We spoke about it. And she basically said neither one of those labels really mattered to voters. She didn't run as an atheist or a Republican. She ran as herself. And because city councils almost never deal with culture war issues, they don't even necessarily deal with Trump, they're dealing with, local businesses and roads and schools and police. So two labels that might provoke a reaction online didn't really affect her at all. One more story. I actually spoke to a candidate for state office a couple of weeks ago who was open about her atheism when running. At least it was in one of her bios. And I was telling her I was pretty surprised she was open about it. And she seemed shocked. She didn't understand why that would be an issue for anyone. I was telling her, well, there just aren't that many elected officials who are open atheists. And again, she was surprised. It didn't affect her campaign at all up to that point. And I think I was the first person who even asked her about it. The point is, most people, I would think, can't name the people on their city council. And they don't know their state representatives. But that also means they almost certainly wouldn't be able to tell me about their religious beliefs, because they rarely come up in those elections. Those elections are far less about money and biography and much more about hustle. Are you campaigning door to door? Are you talking about the issues that people actually care about? Can you get enough people to vote for you? Can you get enough people to vote, period? Because relatively few people vote in those elections. So if you happen to be open about your atheism, but you're running for office where that doesn't even matter, it's a win-win. We get an intelligent person, hopefully, in office, and we get an atheist who brings a brand new face to the ideology. Let me give you my favorite example of this from a few years ago. Megan Hunt. She's from Nebraska, which, if you remember from your government classes, is the one state that only has state senators. Everyone's a senator, there's no house, it's unicameral, not bicameral. So she was a first-time candidate running against another first-time candidate for that seat. And a local newspaper ran profiles of both women. And Megan's included a little sidebar biography that included a spot for her to list her religion. It said atheist. And I remember seeing that and thinking, oh no, she's gonna lose. And then you know what happened? Nothing. It never came up. And maybe more importantly, she never really talked about it while campaigning. She was prepared. I mean, if people asked, she said she would answer it honestly, but then pivot to issues that mattered. But no one did. And then she won the race. She is now State Senator Megan Hunt. And she's been one hell of an amazing force in that Senate. I'm a very cynical person, especially about politics, but when I see her fight for issues that matter to her, I swear, it's inspirational. I've never seen someone in politics whose positions I identify with so closely. I asked her once, how was your atheism not a problem in your race? It's Nebraska. It's rural in a lot of parts. It's very conservative. And she told me she just took the air out of the balloon. She brought it up before any opponent could bring it up. And that allowed her to talk about what actually mattered to voters. She was genuine. She didn't hide who she was, and she talked to people about what she hoped to do for them in office, which turned out to be what they cared about, because her atheist values, even if she didn't spell it out, aligned with their religious values. So here's another question. What does it take for open atheists to win elections? What if your atheism is central to your identity? Is that a problem? Well, this is why it's so important that you think about running for office now, because it is a long-term proposition. I think, based on everything I've seen over the years, if your atheism is the only thing people know about you, yes, it might be political poison. But if it's one of many things people know about you, and you're not the one talking about it, it's really not that big of a deal. And consider what Senator Hunt is able to do as a progressive legislator, even in a conservative state. She's able to use her platform to advocate for sensible policies that she would otherwise be fighting for from the sidelines. So many of us will donate to nonprofits that work on issues we care about. We may try to get internships with them or volunteer for them. I did that. We love reading about a lawsuit from the Freedom from Religion Foundation or the American Humanist Association. Or we enjoy watching a clapback on Twitter from a writer we admire. But what's better than that is being in a position to write the laws instead of having to constantly play defense and complain about other people who are writing laws. Because that's what our movement has been doing for decades. We complain because what other option do we have? For 20 years now, I've listened to talks about legal challenges and how to fight back against the religious right. Rarely have people talked about how to play offense. Conservative Christian politicians will try to change the rules to have Bible readings in schools, or to give churches taxpayer money, or to put up a useless Ten Commandments monument outside the state capitol. And we always have to use the courts to fight back because there aren't enough of us in the room where it happens to just stop the problems from happening in the first place, or at least to raise awareness of what other politicians are doing. Even at the city council level, where you're not writing laws, we can push back against invocation rituals while also helping our city with whatever local issues there are. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to know how to reach out to experts when needed. Or what if you run for school board? You can help craft curriculum decisions. You can make sure kids are getting a quality science education and learning comprehensive sex ed. And yes, maybe you can help end the Pledge of Allegiance ritual, depending on your state laws, while also creating an environment that enriches students. We often hear little kids saying, "I want to grow up to be president." No child ever says, "I can't wait to run for city council. I can't wait to get on the school board." They should. We would all be better off if they did. And this is why we need more people like you in office. Now, maybe some of you are thinking, I'm full of it. Nice ideas, but not for you. Because you are young and you've already plotted out your career path. You want to go into education or law or medicine or business, all of which are very demanding. Or maybe you have a baby or a partner who rightly requires your attention. Those things take up time. How can you possibly run for anything when you're swamped by life? But I'm telling you, that's exactly why you should run. I don't want people in office whose entire life is about getting into office. Imagine what Congress would be like if there were more young mothers, or people who have student loan debt, or who have PhDs, or spent years as a public school teacher, or used to be a bartender. We need those voices. Your backgrounds are the very things that should make you want to be a public servant. If you want to go into medicine because you want to help patients, that's great. But what would also help them is someone pushing for universal health care and affordable medicine. Be in a position where you can guide health policy. I love teachers. I was a teacher. But I wish we had more public school teachers in office because they have a better understanding of what students need and they can advocate for that. There's a famous saying, if you want to get something done, ask a busy person. Well, I know you're all busy. I also know that if you're part of an SSA group or leading an SSA group, you know how to get stuff done. And if you're running an atheist group, you know how to get stuff done while working with people who probably annoy the hell out of you. Literally. Just consider this. And I'll use Dawkins only because he's well known, not because I'm a fan of everything he says. Dawkins was a scientist. And then he became a scientist who wrote books about science that were very popular. His skill was science communication. And what did he do with that? He used that platform to write arguably the best-selling atheist book of all time. All of you already have a platform. And if you're going into some career, you will have that platform. I want you to use that as a launching pad to do something bigger than yourself, because that is what the Christian right does. And as much as I hate to admit it, they're really good at it. They can't produce a decent movie worth a damn, but they get themselves elected up and down the board. And I would argue that's made our country a poorer place for so many people. Now, I know it's daunting to think about running for any office. It's also very easy to raise self-doubts. But all of you who care about these issues are probably more qualified to run for nearly every office I've been talking about. And what's the worst that could happen? You lose. It's okay. It's not the end of the world, I promise you. Most people who run for office lose. But you know what? Many people who win an election have lost previous races. When they lose, they learn from it, fix any mistakes, and they win the next time. Near where I live, a candidate named Marie Newman ran for Congress in 2018 as a Democrat, trying to unseat a very conservative Democrat in the primary. She lost by a couple of points. So what did she do? She decided she would try again and figure out where in her district she wasn't connecting with people. And then she worked her butt off, making sure she had volunteers on the ground in those areas specifically, and made sure she was addressing their needs. And when Illinois held our primary this past March, she beat the guy in the primary by a few points. That's how you do it. A lot of groups that teach people how to run for office tell you to plan to run in multiple cycles because it's not easy to win. Certainly not your first time. By the way, almost all of those positions, school board, city council, even state office in many states, are side jobs. They're not full-time. They expect you to have a life and a career and also do this other work. Senator Megan Hunt, who I mentioned earlier, is in a job that pays $12,000 a year. It's not a job to be a state senator. It's a privilege that basically pays some rent in return. But if you take that honor seriously and you're good at it, imagine what you could do with that power. Okay, so If you are interested, you should visit a couple of websites that may be helpful. These are not the only ones by any means, but they will help you get started. Runforoffice.org will tell you what positions are open in your zip code and when you have to file the paperwork to run. Runforsomething.net will give you step-by-step instructions on how to run a campaign if you're a young progressive candidate, which I'm guessing many of you are. And if you're a woman, may I suggest getherelected.com, which hooks candidates up with volunteers who are eager to help out with all sorts of things. I personally spent some time as a public speaking coach to one candidate a couple of years ago who ran for pretty high office. So, just to summarize, I want you to run for office because as atheists, odds are we share many of the same values. And we need your voices all across the board. I want you to run because having atheists in prominent positions that are not all about promoting atheism will actually make it easier for people to adopt that label. It's a win-win. We get good officials, and you make my job as an activist a little easier. As SSA leaders, you are already role models for other young atheists. But as elected officials, you could be role models for everyone. And listen, no one will ever tell you to run for office. Indian parents will never tell you to run for office. It needs to be something you decide for yourself. But consider this a nudge from me. Just consider it. You're part of this incredible large network of supporters who are rooting for your success. And if you do run, and I happen to share your values, I promise you I will do whatever I can to support you. Good luck.